Hello and welcome to the EPRI Current. I'm your host, Samantha Gilman, and today we're going to have a discussion around electric transportation. It seems every day there's a new news article headline around what is going on with electric transportation. Is the grid going to be ready? Is charging infrastructure? What are the fleets doing? There's a lot of conversation going on right now around electric transportation. So to shed some light on the topic, we're joined by EPRI's Director of Transportation, Britta Gross, and Diego Quevedo, Charging Infrastructure Senior Engineer and Utilities Lead from Daimler Truck. First off, thanks to both of you for joining today.
Yeah.
Happy to be
Thank
here.
you for having me.
Britta, tell us a little bit about what you do at EPRI to give our listeners an idea of what EPRI does with electric transportation.
So I'm Britta Gross. I'm the Director of Transportation. I lead the transportation efforts, which is primarily focused on the electrification of cars, buses, and trucks on the road. I come to this with about 15 years in aerospace and then moved into the transportation field. I spent about 25 years at General Motors and Opel in Germany, working on the hydrogen and the battery electric vehicles. So always outward facing, not designing the cars, but looking at what else has to happen to drive widespread electrification. What's the role of utilities? How much charging or fueling infrastructure? What policies, regulations? What is going to help move this into the large scale arena? And I've just taken those skills and that knowledge now and I've applied it here with a great, passionate team at EPRI, and we're working on this challenge.
And Diego, what's your role at Daimler Truck? And what is some of the activities Daimler Truck is now working on in this electrification space?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Samantha. So my role is as utilities lead here at Daimler Truck North America. And what that entails is basically two main objectives. The first one is supporting our customers directly that have ongoing deployments of our electric vehicles. And second, but I think more important, is working strategically with utilities across the country to make sure the power is available to charge these vehicles, because at scale, these vehicles demand a lot of concentrated power. And I've worked in the heavy duty transportation space for 15 years now. I started designing and developing diesel engines and moved on to rapid problem solving and continuous cost improvement. But I've always, for the past 12 years or so, I've had a passion for electric vehicles and renewable energy. Personally, we don't own a gas car at home anymore. We're an EV only garage, and we have solar and battery on our house. So we've gone off grid for multiple days when we have power outages. So I kind of live and breathe this every day. So I love working on what we're doing here.
Diego, I'm jealous. That's the setup I'm hoping for, keeping my eye on Carvana, looking for that secondhand EV. Well, let's get into it. We don't have a lot of time. We have a lot to discuss. So first, Britta, to kick things off, EPRI's EVs to Scale 2030 initiative is really striking a chord with the energy industry right now, as well as others. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about the initiative and why you think it's resonating with the industry?
Sure. I think if I just say it real simply, the simple answer is that this solution, this program, EVs to Scale 2030, is made by industry for industry. And that's what people understand. We're not creating this out of nothing. We are really taking all the knowledge we've gained directly from years of experience with the manufacturers of electric cars, buses, and trucks, the fleet operators that are purchasing electric vehicles for their fleets, charging property developers working to install EV charging sites, and the utilities that are already working to prepare the grid to support vehicle charging. And we're turning all this knowledge into several impactful tools that aim to streamline the efforts of the industry, and in a way that's very collaborative. So we're all working together to successfully transition to widespread electrification of the transportation sector. So specifically what we've done is we put a stake in the sand in 2030 and asked, what does the utility industry and all the other critical decision makers that are involved in this ecosystem, what do they need to be doing every year between now and 2030 to prepare for more widespread electrification of the cars, the buses, and the trucks that are on the road?
And speaking of 2030, Diego, what is Daimler Truck trying to accomplish by 2030? And what are some of the challenges you're seeing with fleet adoption?
Yeah, sure. So Daimler Truck globally has a goal, not by 2030, but that by 2039, that every new vehicle that we offer is carbon neutral. And we already have 10 battery electric vehicles for sale globally. And by the end of this year, we're going to add the Mercedes-Benz e-Actros 600 in Europe. Here in North America, we've got the Class A e-Cascadia and EM2 Class 6 and 7 trucks that kind of I deal with day to day with customers. And by 2030, we're looking to enable additional use cases for customers to electrify. A megawatt charging system, or MCS as it's known, will be available by then and in vehicles. So megawatt charging, as the name says it, you're going to be able to charge a vehicle at megawatt power levels. So that's 1,000 kilowatts, right? Over 1,000 kilowatts power draw from one single vehicle. Today, if you go to a public charging site like Electrify America or Tesla Supercharger, you may pull 100 kilowatts, and that's considered a lot for a passenger car. Maybe over 200 if you have like a much newer vehicle. But with megawatt charging, you'll be able to pull over 1,000 kilowatts, so 1 megawatt of power. So that's what we're working on. And, one of the, I guess, major challenges, for 2030 is really uncertainty around, the regulation. The current TCO, or better known as total cost of ownership for customers, can be challenging right now because these vehicles are more expensive. Customers have to pay or put more capital up front to purchase the chargers and maybe pay for grid upgrades to get the power for the vehicles. So that TCO parity with diesel is a bit challenging. But by 2030, that should improve as the technology improves and the costs come down on these vehicles to help customers with that upfront purchase price.
So I want to get to something that you were just talking about, the megawatt charging. Britta, as we continue to see transportation electrify, especially, the medium heavy duty trucks, what are the challenges we're seeing relative to grid readiness?
Yeah, let me build on what Diego just said too, because I wasn't thinking I would go in this direction, but I think it's really important. Diego's talking right now about megawatt chargers. And the reality is, and what's beautiful about being here with Diego is we've got sort of the extreme end of what's really going to be challenging. And Diego's got his hands full at Daimler Truck trying to put these batteries on very large trucks that have often long range needs and carrying heavy loads. That is sort of that big bookend at the end that says that's going to be the tough one. If we can get that right, which is why I'm so excited to always work with Diego, if we can get that right, everything else is easy. So there are a lot of truck use cases that are a lot easier. Last mile package delivery in your neighborhood, these medium duty trucks also that Daimler Truck offers, and so on. So just keep that in mind. Not everything has to be a 1 megawatt charger. Some of this can be done overnight with level 2 and so on. So that's one thing that is both a challenge and an opportunity. I might add in there, the timing mismatch is a really tough thing. This idea that a fleet operator can go order a fleet of electric heavy-duty Class 8 trucks from Daimler Truck today, and those 12 whatever trucks can be delivered in maybe 4 to 6 months. It's different than the reaction time of the utility industry. And the utility industry grew up over 100 years addressing building loads. It might take 2 years to build a house or 4 years to build a production facility. So we have a challenge right now in just getting the timing to match and meet the needs of consumers and fleet operators, for example, that have a much shorter procurement time for the vehicles. And that's why we have to start the grid conversations even earlier, because it can take a little bit longer on the grid. So we have to just figure out this timing mismatch and get everyone to working together, which is the beauty of EVs to Scale 2030. It's about collaborating and getting this information on the same page and getting all the players in the same place. I would add to that, There are 290 or so million cars, buses, and trucks on the road. And that could literally mean that EV charging might be needed anywhere. Challenge, also an opportunity. So we just have to, think about what that means. But that is something that's worth mentioning. And then maybe I'd mention that there are over 3,000 utilities in the country. And you can see where this adds complexity because every utility is pretty much local or regional. They have different processes. And so imagine a fleet operator trying to deal nationally or nationwide getting a fleet ready. And they've got different utilities with different programs and different ways to procure power and sign up for power needs and so on. So these are things that are really challenges. And then maybe the last thing is just waiting too long to get to your utility and start that conversation because you're thinking so much about the truck or the car or the bus. And then you think, oh, now I've got the trucks coming. Let me go now talk to the utility. And in many ways, this almost needs to be a little bit, well, certainly at the same time, but maybe even reversed. You got to get this on the radar of the utilities early.
So speaking of, and talk about complex, Diego, Britta mentioned there are more than 3,000 utilities. What has utility outreach look like for your fleet customers? Is Daimler having to engage with the utilities on behalf of fleet operators?
Part of my role oftentimes is facilitator of introduction to our customers. And that can vary widely, right? Because when you think of a fleet, there's a saying that goes, when you met one utility, you met one utility. And I think the same applies to a fleet customer. When you met one fleet, you've met one fleet. They're all a little different, but you can sort of bucket them into certain categories. And they're kind of on the extreme end of the spectrum in terms of engagement with utilities already. So let's say on one extreme end, you have like cold storage, food delivery folks that manage cold storage facilities. These are all your refrigerated tractors and trailers that you see at grocery stores. Or fleets like a Walmart or an Amazon, right? They own, retail stores. In the case of Amazon, they've got data centers. These are folks that already work in the energy space. They kind of know, they at least have people that work in that space. They just need to talk to their fleet operators. I say just, but they already have people that know and speak the language of utilities. So it's a resource they can tap internally. On the opposite end of the spectrum, right? You've got fleet that all they do is pick up containers at a port, right? And they just do that every day, nonstop. And they park their tractors in a dirt lot, right? They could park, 40 to 50 of these tractors in a dirt lot, and that dirt lot may not even have power today. So those customers have zero interaction with the utility. They have the highest learning curve. So it varies widely, right? And part of what I do is, one, make them understand what utilities, how utilities operate, because you have your investor-owned utilities, you have your public, municipal utilities, and then you have your co-ops. And those three types of utilities operate a little bit differently, even though each one of them is unique. So it's a lot of information sharing, education with fleets, having them understand how utilities operate. And similarly, when I talk to utilities, I'm trying to educate them on how fleets think when it comes to electrification. And one of the biggest things I tell utilities is, your fuel, the electricity, needs to be competitive with your competitor, right? The competition is diesel. So you have to keep that in mind as a utility if you want to be successful and help this transition be as successful as possible.
So earlier, Diego, you were talking about the goals for Daimler Truck for 2039 and sort of this first initial challenge getting to 2030 and trying to get some of the use cases. As we get closer to 2030 and beyond, what do you think are likely to be growing challenges or opportunities, as Britta would like to say?
Yeah. What keeps me up at night is exactly what Britta was talking about, is that power capacity available. It's not power generation, right? We can generate power, The country has ramped up power generation very fast in the past. It is connecting the generation source to where the fleet need it. It's the physical poles and wires, right? And when you look at certain areas of the country where you have the highest amount of freight being moved, there may be one fleet that has, 1,000 tractors that they operate out of a depot. Well, guess what? Across the street is their competitor. Oh, and guess what? Down the street is 3 other fleets. So all of a sudden, you're going to need not just to electrify one depot with 5 to 10 megawatt needs of power capacity. That's, to put that into perspective, the Empire State Building has a power capacity of 9 megawatts. So now think of just a parking lot of trucks, which is not a very big footprint, needing 10 megawatts of power. Oh, and by the way, there's 20 fleets in that same area. So you now have 10 megawatts times 20, like the concentration of power is going to be significant. And the pace at which that power capacity can be added, as Britta mentioned, is the biggest opportunity for the industry rather than a challenge.
So talking about where the anticipated capacity is going to be needed, Britta, your team recently released the e-roadmap tool late last year to show where and when EV loads are likely going to be appearing on the grid. Why, in addition to what Diego just said, why is that needed and how is it going?
So it's needed because we knew that we needed to drive confidence into the market so that actors could act, decision makers could make decisions early on, because all of this takes time. Diego mentioned also this confidence that the market needs to act, not everybody waiting. Well, are you moving first or am I moving first? We got to make this happen at the same time. So we did 2 things in e-roadmap that are really important. One, we had to figure out how to use new kinds of trusted data to drive more certainty into the market. And 2, we had to provide that data in a more simple and visual format so that it could be easily understood and become actionable for folks like utilities and utility regulators and other policymakers. They had to know what they were looking at. So how do you make this simple and get really good data in there? So we combined about a dozen sources of data to create e-roadmap. It included just about every available data set you can buy, like vehicle registrations and fleet telematics data. We also added data from Daimler Truck and other heavy-duty manufacturers, their telematics data, so that we knew really the behavior, the movement of these today diesel trucks, so that we had a feeling for where are they probably going to be moving in the future. Because again, it's not that it's a different load. It just is a concentrated load that we really wanted to pay particular attention to. And then there's no better data than asking forward-leaning fleet operators when and where they're planning to electrify their large fleet. So this data is included as well. And that is really what makes e-roadmap very distinctive. A growing number of actual fleet electrification plans from major fleet operators like Amazon, Enterprise, Pitt, Ohio, and Tesla, for example, have contributed data to e-roadmap. And that's available online now for the public and continues to be updated. So we always have the most up-to-date current information as it's streaming in to us. And I think it's that pragmatic approach to aggregating. And by the way, we anonymize the data too. We are not interested in sharing plans with anyone else. It is simply when you add up all those fleets that Diego talked about, sort of in the same area, what does the utility need to know about all those fleets? Not just one, but all of them. And that anonymizes the data in a very, very important way. And so I think it's getting a lot of attention because it's collaborative, it's real data, and it's still early, but we know it's been cited already in rate filings in Colorado, California. There's been some use of the e-roadmap in Pennsylvania, and then we used it in some Senate budget committee testimony a few weeks ago. It's getting a lot of attention. It's still early, and yet it is getting some real recognition because it was sorely needed.
Back to Diego. When you're speaking with stakeholders around electrifying, and you just spoke again around those 2030 goals, those 2039 goals, what is your biggest ask of those stakeholders, whether it be a policymaker, utility, fleet operator?
Yeah, my biggest ask is simple alignment between especially policymakers and regulators, right? There are very ambitious goals. And that goal, rightly so, should be the guiding North Star of the states, the country. And then there needs to be alignment with all the policymakers and agencies that play a key role in that, right? That includes, for example, state legislature, utility commission, energy office. They need to be aligned. There needs to be communication, and they need to understand the market. What actually drives the market that they're looking to set these policies on. So it's alignment and it's communication between policymakers and stakeholders within the market itself. OEMs, fleet, likewise. So yeah, it's not a two-way communication. I don't want to make it sound like it's all on policymakers. It's a two-way street of communication of making sure that we're basically rowing to the same objective.
And it also sounds like they all need to check out the e-roadmap.
Absolutely. I use it all the time when customers inquire, come to us. They have a question about, hey, I'm thinking about electrifying my fleet. We're like, okay, what's the address? And we go to e-roadmap. We show them all the tools available. So I love it.
That is great to hear. Now, it is surprising how fast 20 minutes can go. So we have to close up this episode. But I want to give you both an opportunity to leave any final thoughts with our listeners. So, Britta, is there any final thought, any final piece of information that you want our listeners to walk away with?
I would say if you're a fleet operator or a charging property developer and you know where your plans are and what you're planning to do, just it's not even just high level understanding of where you plan to go, where across the country you plan to deploy in the next few years. Please consider sharing this data with us to keep informing e-roadmap, because that is the knowledge the utility industry and the regulators have about where to get prepared. It behooves everyone to start investing in the grid today so that customers get the right experience and a much more quicker interconnection for their needs. And then the other thing is just start now. Don't keep kicking the can down the road another year, another 2 years. Start now when things are a little bit under control and you're just starting to think through fleet electrification and charging stations. But start now while it's a little quieter, because as we get closer and closer to 2030 and those very ambitious goals, it's just going to get busier and we won't have time to really think about what we're doing. Let's act now.
And Diego, anything to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, it's hard to beat Britta. That was excellent. I always like to tell customers that heavy duty vehicles, they can only charge from the equivalent of a Tesla supercharger or Electrify America station, right? There is no option on these large vehicles to plug it into a standard outlet, like you would in your home's garage. So an overnight charge for these big vehicles is like a minimum of 50 kilowatts, which is considered a fast charge today. So minimum like 50 kilowatts charging overnight for these vehicles. It doesn't take long for the power needs to be significant. So yeah, if you're a fleet operator, you're going to have significant power needs. Contact the utilities, to share those plans or just start the discussion. Even if you don't have plans, just start the discussion, like what it would take, if that's at all in your roadmap in the next 5 years.
Great.
Perfect.
Well, thank you, Diego, Britta. Great conversation. I'm excited for our listeners to check out the e-roadmap. Please check out the podcast description. We will include the links there. Thank you for your time. And I'm Samantha Gilman, closing out this episode. Thanks so much.
If you like today's show, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast. And feel free to share the podcast with your colleagues and friends. For more information about EPRI, please visit our website at www.epri.com. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter at EPRI News. Together, we are shaping the future of energy.